The city council meeting in Encinitas last night was pretty interesting, and there was an intensive conversation related to the survival potential of the Urban Forest Advisory Committee here in Encinitas, rather than just vote forward a proposed work plan for the upcoming year by that group. City council officials found it prudent instead to publicly call into question whether or not that group should even exist. So when this kind of thing comes up in our city, often my name does get thrown into the mix. It's no surprise. I have strong feelings about this subject, and I really am not too shy to share them. So given that this is a subject that I probably know more about than almost anybody else as a public constituent of this city, and that my name specifically does and did come up as part of this conversation at the city council meeting last night, I figured that I could at least do the service of making what I am expressing clear. And so when it comes to the Urban Forest Advisory Committee, I learned two things last night. Two things that really stood out to me. The first being that within our city, whether this be public constituents or elected officials, that outside of our city's actual staff who works with trees, there seems to be very little understanding of what the Urban Forest Advisory Committee even does. And it then stands to reason that people who do not understand what the Urban Forest Advisory Committee even does would struggle to understand the value of that work that they don't understand. This adds up, but it's unfortunate. And I want to start out by saying that all of this is outlined explicitly in the city's Urban Forest Management Program Administrative Manual. I brought this up in a previous video, and I'm now recognizing that there are people in our city who should have already read this before they are making these assertions publicly on behalf of their constituents, who very clearly have not. Do some homework before you start running your mouth. That's my first bit of advice as it relates to the Urban Forest Advisory Committee to our elected officials. If you want my vote, do some homework before you start running your mouth. And with that said, what I'd like to do is to create a framework to describe that there are 5 kind of organizational entities that in the city of Encinitas interact substantially with city-owned trees in a way that has implications on their health and management. And I am going to admittedly save the best for last. I'm going to start with kind of the least consequential, which is going to be the Rancho Coastal Tree Service. This is a private corporation that has a contract with San Diego Gas and Electric to do all of the power line clearance pruning. And this includes cutting city trees. This is in communication with Public Works staff, but there really isn't much room for city staff to say, do this and not that. It's essentially like implications to city trees that our city doesn't really have that much oversight related to. So they're sort of just an incidental, unfortunate piece of this whole urban forest management world that oftentimes the worst pruning that you're ever going to see from an actual certified arborist is going to be that type of power line clearance pruning, which is a big part of why many self-respecting arborists choose not to go into that work. It has to happen. It does happen. You'll see some bad cuts even on city trees, and if it relates to power line clearance, I want to make sure that people are aware that there are third parties involved and that work kind of just necessarily goes forward. The other is getting into the city staff side of things. So number 2 would be Public Works Department staff. And the Public Works Department inherently have an antagonistic relationship with the sustained longevity of big old trees. And the clear consensus among the constituents of our community is that we want big old trees as much as that can be true in a way that is not detrimental to public safety in our community. So you don't tend to find that celebrating the historic canopy in Leucadia is a very hot button political issue. As soon as you touch it to streetscape, you're talking controversy. But the notion of, did we love that covered corridor, is uncontroversial. And just one of the most clear consensus opinions in our community is that we want more big old trees. And it makes people sad to recognize that the pattern appears to be the opposite. So when I learned this stuff in college, I was taught that the average life expectancy of a street tree in our region is 8 to 10 years. 8 to 10 years. And since then, I've actually had well-reputed people who probably know this stuff better than I do actually check me on that reference and have suggested that really the average life expectancy of a street tree in our area is 6 to 8 years. So you tear up a sidewalk, a tree gets damaged, the tree becomes a safety hazard, the tree comes down. Our own administrative manual requires that that tree is replaced 1 to 1. So you have something like a 70-year-old tree, large, stately tree full of sequestered carbon, really high ecological ecosystem service value. It gets cut down because that's what's convenient for quote-unquote progress. And I want to recognize that there will always be instances where we decisively and strategically as a community do get rid of big old trees for the sake of pavement. There are instances where that is just and strategic, but that is not all of them. So you ask a concrete guy, is this tree in the way? And the answer is yes. You ask somebody walking down the street, do we want trees? The answer is yes. And this is the origin of the city's Urban Forest Advisory Committee. Public Works staff, intrinsic to their work, have an antagonistic relationship with the sustained longevity of big old trees. So if we want to up that average, if we want to have trees that we are planting today live for longer than 8 years, something has to be different. There has to be an additional form of planning and oversight. And that is the third entity here, the city arborist, which is not a staff position, is a contracted role that's actually fulfilled by a team. It's not one person. Chris Kalstrand is the one who will show up at the meetings, and he's like the quote-unquote city arborist, but he's not out there doing that work predominantly. It's his staff, and that included me previously. So I can speak to this materially because that was me. I was doing that work. And what I know is that the Public Works staff, Sylvester and his team, basically supervise the city arborist team, the contracted entity of city arborist, which is fulfilled by a very expensive for-profit environmental consulting firm. So what we're doing, the arrangement that we have created, is a umbrella framework that's bifurcated in terms of oversight of the trees in our urban forest. And originally that meant street trees. We have the city arborist. We have the Urban Forest Advisory Committee. And so with the city arborist, what you have is somebody whose livelihood depends on finding a way to get to yes. That is what environmental consultants do. And they're hired by the people that they are supposedly meant to keep in check. If that sounds reasonable to you, I think that we're just going to fundamentally disagree on the reasonability of putting a fox in charge of overseeing a bunch of hens. That is the city arborist public works relationship. This is a very lucrative contract for Dudek. And the way that they maintain that contract favorability is by making their client, who is the public works staff, happy. How do you do that? You find a way to say yes. And what that means functionally, as it relates to management of trees in our city, is that the city arborist's functional role in our city is to facilitate the removal of trees. That might sound crazy because it is. Their role is to facilitate the removal of trees in a way that is legally defensible and minimizes liability exposure for the city. There is nothing in the industry standards that they mean to adhere to that says we want our trees to live for more than 8 years. There is nothing in the standards of this industry, which is the backbone of the kind of credibility of our quote-unquote city arborist. There's nothing in those standards that says that you need to treat trees well. There is nothing in those standards that determines what a healthy watering establishment regime looks like. And to be honest, the young tree care in our city is atrocious. And nobody is saying do better. Nobody except for the Urban Forest Advisory Committee. So you have this bifurcated framework of a kind of regulatory umbrella that sits over the Public Works Department staff's activities that relate to management of our urban forest. And one of those is an extremely expensive, extremely lucrative for a private corporation contract that effectively covers city staff's asses while they continue to cut down trees. The other bit is a group of volunteers who are of this community, who are dedicated to advocacy on behalf of our urban forest. And so one of those is free, one of those is meaningful, one of those is seemingly on the chopping block on behalf of our city council. Are you serious? Everything that the Urban Forest Advisory Committee does, if they no longer do that, those activities go directly to contracted, super expensive employees. We're talking like hundreds of dollars per hour to get the same product that people currently are offering for free to our city. If this isn't the dumbest, dojiest crap that I've ever heard, I might not know anything at all. So you have Rancho Coastal, kind of a non-issue. You have the Public Works Department staff who, just by the nature of what they do, have an antagonistic relationship with the trees that our city wants to maintain. You have the city arborist who effectively works for that second entity. You have West Coast Arborist, another contract, another private for-profit corporation. And I want to actually push back on a little bit of the sentiment that came up last night. This is a very high dollar contract. It's more than $1 million annually, if I'm not mistaken, for the entire management of the trees in our city by that corporation. And I've worked with people in that company for many years at this point, and I think that I've demonstrated to them that I am extremely demanding when it comes to the quality of the work that is done with trees, but in a way that even the people whose lives I'm making harder have only come to respect me for. I know what I'm talking about, and I'm really good at what I do. And so, in the absence of your own understanding of the value of the Urban Forest Advisory Committee, I'm trying to express to you that this is the only positive advocate group on behalf of trees in our community. The city arborist is not that. Just look at the city's master planting palette, for example. In 2018, the assistant city manager at that time asked me to help update the city's kind of master tree planting palette. It's the overall cumulative list of what types of trees can be drawn from for plans that relate to like street tree planting, median plantings, those kinds of things, parkway plantings. I provided them with something like 60 plus additional taxa that I thought would make better trees, to be frank, than the ones that were routinely being planted by the city at that time. Pretty much totally blown off by the city arborist. The list as it stands today sucks so bad that nobody even uses it. And we instead are getting trees like this one, Quercus tomentella, an incredible tree that I look forward to trusting that I will be sitting in the true shade of. This tree cannot live for merely 6 years. If it does, there is no point in it being here in the first place. This tree is going to take 100 years to become what we know it to contain as like true innate majesty and value and ecological contribution. But right now it's not that. This thing isn't providing habitat value. This thing isn't sequestering carbon at a rate that's anywhere comparable to a one-to-one large old tree that would have been removed. And Quercus tomentella decidedly not on the city's master tree planting palette. So city park staff, public works staff, the city arborist team, everybody has completely just dismissed the official city planting list after failing to integrate what was offered as a volunteer effort by experts within our community. So West Coast Arborist, it's a big dollar contract, and the work, I kind of mentioned all of that demandingness coming from me because when I was essentially their like kind of internal boss in a certain respect, I did give people a hard time, and I made them go back and I made them do things differently and made them do things better and made them do things that they just weren't inclined to do without specific prompting. And so what I want to say about West Coast Arborists, they're a big corporation. Some of the people who work for that company are really good at what they do. And more pertinent to this particular conversation, per unit worked, they are not expensive. In fact, it would be really interesting for like our council, for example, to more in-depth review the kind of invoicing and allocation history as it relates to management of trees in Encinitas by West Coast arborists, because I've even actually heard from their competitors that there's no way that they can do the work that they are doing for the rates that they're charging. Like, they're actually charging our city in some cases so little for a particular activity that other professionals in the industry don't actually understand how they're able to make all of the ends meet. So even though $1 million looks like a big chunk of money, and it is, I'm never gonna even like be close to that kind of money unless something changes in the world of growing plants and the value of that. But what we get for each of those dollars is not low. And so what I would beg from our city officials as it relates to that particular company and that contract and the management thereof is that we do better, that maybe there could actually be less work done and have it be better work that's done. And so we're in the industry, there's a big push towards a more prescriptive approach to pruning strategy and planning, and it would be really wonderful to get away from this grid approach and actually have prescriptive management of the trees in our city. And that takes a lot more expertise all the way around than I'm confident that we comfortably are willing to leverage within our city at this moment. I think that we really should have a staff city arborist. I mean, we probably should have 4, but this contracted arrangement, so you have a contractor overseeing another contractor in a way where that first contractor wants everything to simply be smooth. So you don't get any pushback from the community. That means that things are good. Nothing fell and smashed anybody. That means that things are good. Are they good? We, as the constituents of Encinitas, have just, by the nature of being in this community, seen more and more sky, less big old trees, more trees coming down, more butchering and topping of trees, not really so much by city activities, thankfully, but privately so. And as it sits today, if I were to compare the state of our urban forest with, say, 2019, trees under a certain age are really looking promising, like this one behind me, Quercus tomentella, put in by the outstanding volunteers as part of an Arbor Day event. And this is a local endangered species that ultimately will be one of the most beautiful trees in our community, should we allow that to be true. I'm pretty long-winded, and I know that this is gonna turn off a lot of people when they just see the length of it. So I just want to cap this off by quickly getting into all of the good things that are happening with trees in our city. Urban Forest Advisory Committee is one of their responsibilities, in addition to making sure that our city actually manages the trees according to our city's own internally implemented rules and guidelines. Other than that, one of the things that the Urban Forest Advisory Committee does is to essentially spearhead the organization of each annual Arbor Day planting event. And originally, the Parks Department was not in any way subject to the purview of the Urban Forest Advisory Committee, and Arbor Day planting events were focused on street trees. So I started helping the city with these events in 2019, At that time, we planted a whole bunch of trees on the lettered and numbered streets in the downtown area, street trees though, parkway trees. And as it turns out, Encinitas is getting pretty full, and it's hard to find a concentrated alley of planting opportunities in the public works portion of the tree planting space within our city. So some trees are public works trees and some trees are parks trees, and we found that we just couldn't do what we were wanting to do in terms of planting good amounts of trees with volunteer engagement as street trees. So in 2022, I worked with the Parks Department staff to organize the Arbor Day event at Cottonwood Creek Park. And this was totally different because it was in the park, for one thing, and we were exclusively planting native trees, most of which went into an ongoing restoration project funded by the city, the first of its kind. And so what that event amounted to was a whole lot of native trees going back into their habitat by the hands of largely young people from our community and their families. And it sort of set a new model for Arbor Day events. And I'll say that that particular event, 2022 Cottonwood Creek Park Arbor Day planting event, the Parks Department staff pretty much saved Arbor Day in Encinitas by facilitating that event. And things worked out well, and people seemed to really enjoy it. And so in the years since, there's actually been a shift in emphasis, and we're getting more and more of these Arbor Day events putting trees into our parks. So much so that as of this year, 2025's Arbor Day was what was I saying? 2025 Arbor Day was actually a Parks Department event. So this is a good segue for me to get into the glorious, positive things coming out of the Encinitas Parks and Recreation Department. When I first started working with the city on tree things, in the entirety of city staff, there was one person who was a certified arborist. And Bob Keeley carried a lot of weight on his shoulders when it came to arboricultural aspects of our city planning and management back in those days. And today, I'm happy to say that no other group within our city has so significantly stepped up as the Parks Department staff. And today, all of our park supervisors, every one of our park supervisors is a certified arborist. And in years past, they would call me and say, hey, we have to redo this concrete browed drainage ditch, and there's tree roots that there may be implications to, and want to make sure, is there a way that this tree can be retained? Are these roots sound to be cut? Can we shift the arrangement of the stormwater management infrastructure in a way where it still works and the tree still gets to be? When I was in France even, Brian Sandlin, one of our awesome park supervisors, called me for some advice on the care of the now state heritage tree, the large Canary Island palm at Moonlight Beach. And so in a certain respect, these are favors that have been asked of me, kind of. But I am grateful that that is true. And this is the culture of the Urban Forest Advisory Committee in our city. So these are people who love trees, who care about the trees in our city, and wonderfully have been positioned as public advocates in a way that is advisory. This is non-binding for our city council, for our city staff. I say I was on the Urban Forest Advisory Committee again, which I hope to be soon actually, could say anything that I want. It doesn't mean that city council has to do it. But you need to understand how valuable that liberated speech is. The city arborist cannot tell you the truth and maintain their contract. They are making money from our city removing trees. The Parks Department, fantastic team, they still struggle with their colleagues. And so when it comes to citywide tree management, planning, strategy, forward-looking vision, the positiveness, the excitement, the inspiration, the enthusiasm, the multi-generational approach exclusively comes from the Urban Forest Advisory Committee. And they do this for free. Thousands and thousands of dollars worth of time, consultation, for free, to the benefit of our community, in a way that without the UFAC, you'd probably have to have another contractor oversee a contractor overseeing a contractor. This is the way that it's working now with the Encinitas Habitat Stewardship Program. A contractor overseeing a contractor. The purity of aspiration towards a more robust and sustainable urban forest within Encinitas is exclusively the purview of the public and the Urban Forest Advisory Committee, who is made up of the public. The meetings are publicly noticed, agendized. Any individual from the public can show up to those meetings, speak on the record, express their wants and opinions related to trees and their management within our city. This is all free. This is the good in our city. And in fact, it's evidenced by the incredible Parks and Recreation staff who originally were not subject to any of this, bringing things before the Urban Forest Advisory Committee or working with the Urban Forest Advisory Committee on events. None of that was Parks' responsibility in the first place. And one of the things that you will find from people who are really good at what they do is that they are not afraid of scrutiny. And the Parks staff have not only tolerated very sometimes ideological input from people like me. I admit that I have a bent in this. Not only has that been well received by our Parks Department staff, they have encouraged more involvement. They have initiated more involvement. And so when it comes to the value of the Urban Forest Advisory Committee, ask your own staff. They seem to want more of this, not less. So here's what I can say. If this is a good way for me to summarize as I'm heading home, the Urban Forest Advisory Committee is the only true transparency in our city as it relates to tree management. The contributions that they make each year to our city are worth, at the billable rate of a DUDEC employee, many thousands of dollars each year. And I can say this confidently because I have been on both sides of that table. I have been the representative of the city. I have been the person giving the representative of the city a hard time. And that's always been because the tendency without checks and balances is to slip. Just as my previous video about the trees on Evergreen illustrated, having rules in place doesn't make people follow rules. And paying somebody to assure everybody that you're following the rules doesn't make you follow the rules. So if our concern is for the trees and for the value of the money that we are investing in our trees, you should be begging the Urban Forest Advisory Committee to do more. How uncreative can you possibly be? We have a one-time ever look at our Urban Forest Management Program Administrative Manual. Is that for real? You're only gonna have staff review and revise their own rules? Is that the truth of this? This is absurd. Put that before the UFAC. Do it every 5 years. It's not a static system. We learn things, we know this works, that doesn't, it's different here than there, and we're gonna operate based on these gained understandings. But to just say, oh, we did it, let's close the door, they're done. Urban forest checked off. You can't fail our trees worse than that. To conceivably get rid of enthusiastic local experts who are offering their valuable time to the city pro bono to accomplish remarkable things like successful community Arbor Day planting events featuring locally native endangered plants that our city is named after. All of this free. So you are suggesting that we either get rid of all of these good things that come from the UFAC, or pay somebody super high dollar to do it. Does any of that make any sense? Are you kidding me in even talking about killing the UFAC? Are you kidding me?